James Taylor is considered as one of the best folk rock singer-songwriters in the history of rock and roll. James Taylor was born on March 12, 1948, in Boston, Massachusetts. He is one of 5 children. Upon moving to North Carolina in 1951, Taylor's father would become the Dean of Medicine at North Carolina University at Chapel Hill. His mother was an aspiring opera singer. Taylor's first instrument was a cello, and he switched to guitar in 1960. He attended a prep boarding school in Massachusetts in 1961 called Milton Academy. It was there he met Danny Korchmar from New York. The two worked together, and Taylor wrote his first song at age 14. Taylor and Korchmar formed a duo in 1963 and began playing coffee houses around Martha's Vineyard called Jamie and Cooch. After a lost focus of focus at Milton, Taylor left in 1964 and went back to Chapel Hill High School and joined his brother's band, called the Corsairs, where he played electric guitar. Later that year, Taylor cut his first single, an original, called Cha Cha Blues. After the band moved away after high school, Taylor went back to Massachusetts. Taylor started looking for colleges during his senior year, but went into depression, and ultimately his grades declined, and he admitted himself into the McLean Hospital in 1965 in Belmont, Massachusetts. There, he was treated with Thorazine and was able to maintain a more organized daily schedule and overall mindset. As the Vietnam War approached, Taylor received psychological rejection from the Selective Service System, as he showed up with 2 white-suited McLean assistants. Taylor's brother Livingston and sister Kate would later be students and patients at McLean as well. Taylor would go on to earn his high school diploma in 1966. When later asked about his stay at McLean, he said, "It was a lifesaver." In 1966, Taylor checked out of McLean and moved back to New York to start a band with his old friend Korchmar. While there, they added the bass player Zachary Wisner and drummer Jim O'Brien and would call themselves the Flying Machine. By the summer of 1966, they were playing at well-known venues in Greenwich Village such as the Night Owl Cafe. Taylor started doing heroin as it became the norm between band members. In a recording session late night 1966, the group cut 2 of Taylor's singles, Brighten Your Night with My Day and Night Owl. It received some radio airplay in the Northeast, but charted only number 102 nationally. After a series of poor appearances outside New York, the Flying Machine broke up. Taylor's life started to go downhill over the next year. His drug use had developed into full-blown heroin addiction. When asked about that period, he said, "I just fell into it, since it was as easy to get high in the village as it was to get drunk." He became a busker in Washington Square Park, playing guitar to fight off depression, and also let runaways and criminals stay at his apartment. Finally, out of money and abandoned by his manager, he made a desperate call one night to his father. Isaac Taylor flew to New York that night and attempted to rescue James. He rented a car and drove back to North Carolina with James in his possessions that night, and as a result, Taylor spent 6 months getting treatment and making a tentative recovery. He also needed throat operation, which he got, to fix vocal cords damaged from singing too harshly. Taylor would later say of his New York period, "I learned a lot about music and too much about drugs." Taylor decided to try being a solo act and change of scenery. In late 1967, funded by a small family inheritance, he moved to London. He recorded some demos in Soho, and capitalizing on Korchmar's connection to the King Bees, he sent his recordings to Peter Asher, who was the A&R head for the Beatles' newly formed label, Apple Records. Asher showed the demos to Paul McCartney, who gave much praise to Taylor's style and musical abilities. Taylor became the first non-British act signed to Apple. Taylor wrote additional material, including Carolina in My Mind, and rehearsed with a new backing band. Taylor recorded what would become his first album for July. In October 1968, at Trident Studio, at the same time the Beatles were recording the White Album. McCartney and an uncredited George Harrison guested on Carolina in My Mind, whose lyric, "Holy host of others standing around me," referred to the Beatles. McCartney and Asher brought in arranger Richard Hewson to add both orchestrations to several of the songs and unusual link passages between them, which would receive a mixed reception at best. During the studio recording sessions, Taylor fell back into his drug habit, using heroin and methadone. He underwent treatment in a British program, returned to New York, and was hospitalized there, and then finally committed himself into Austin Riggs Center in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, with emphasized cultural and historical factors in trying to treat difficult psychiatric disorders. Meanwhile, Apple released his debut album, James Taylor, in December 1968 in the UK and February 1969 in the US. The critical reaction was generally good. Carolina in My Mind was released as a single, although it failed to chart in the UK and reached only number 118 in the US. At this point in his life, it is safe to say that Taylor's personal life was hindering on his personal life was hindering on his professional life, and this was a make-or-break time period in his life. Taylor with a $5 million lawsuit for leaving, but McCartney and the other Beatles saved him, saying that artists should not be holding each other to contract. In July 1969, Taylor headlined a 6-night stand at the Troubadour in Los Angeles. On July 20th, he performed at the Newport Folk Festival as the last act and was cheered on by thousands. Shortly after, he broke his hands and both feet in a motorcycle accident at Martha's Vineyard and was forced to stop playing for several months. He still wrote songs while recovering, and in 1969 signed a new deal with Warner Brothers Records. Taylor moved to California, keeping Asher his manager and recording producer amidst the previous tension in December. He held the recording sessions for the first album there. With the participation of Carole King, Sweet Baby James was released in February 1970 and included Fire and Rain, a song about Taylor's experience in psychiatric institutions and the suicide of his friend. Both the album and the single reached number 3 in the Billboard charts, marked the direction he would take in the following years. The album got several Grammy nominations, including Album of the Year. His career success so far and appeal to female fans of various ages were crucial to the rising stardom of James Taylor, and on March 1st, 1971, he made the Time magazine cover story. Taylor's biggest hit single in the U.S., a version of Carole King's standard You've Got a Friend, reached number 1 on the Billboard 100 in late July. The album itself reached number 2 in the album charts, which would be Taylor's highest position ever on that list. In 1972, Taylor received his first Grammy Award for Best Male Pop Vocal Performance in You've Got a Friend. King also won Song of the Year for the same song. Taylor did not return to the recording studio until January 1974. The album was critical and commercial disaster, being his first album to miss the top 5 in his contract with Warner. It received poor reviews and sold just 300,000 copies in the U.S. The title track was a huge disappointment and failed to even appear on the top 100. With the close of Taylor's contract with Warner in November, the label released Greatest Hits, the album that comprised most of his best work between 1970 and 1976. It would be his best-selling album ever. It was certified 11 times platinum in the U.S., earning a diamond certification by the RIAA, and eventually selling close to 20 million copies worldwide. It stands among the best-selling folk album by any artist ever. In 1977, James Taylor signed with Columbia Records and released JT that June. Sweet Baby James was the last album that got a Grammy nod, and this was the first album since that album to get a nod in 1978. After years of collaborating with musicians such as Dennis Wilson, Paul Simon, Art Garfunkel, Randy Newman, and the Beatles, recording 6 albums, earning 6 Grammy Awards, posting 18 Billboard hits, peaking at number 1 and number 3, Taylor earned his spot in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in the year 2000. That same year, he was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Rolling Stone magazine named Taylor one of the top 100 artists of all time at number 84 in 2004. Taylor also received an honorary doctorate from Berklee College of Music in 1995. In May 2010, Taylor revisited Live at the Troubadour CD/DVD of his November 2007 live performance with Carole King at the Troubadour in Los Angeles. The subsequent Troubadour reunion tour was one of the most successful tours of the decade. Taylor will go down in rock and roll history as one of the most influential singer-songwriters of all time. His personal struggles ended up shaping him into what he has become as an artist.